What's the name of the show? Good evening, and welcome to our program tonight. The program is called Now is the Time to Wake Up. I'm Chris Conway, your host for this 2-hour program. Hang on and stay tuned with us, and just know that we're here to bring you the truth. And with us tonight is our friend and fellow brother in the Lord, David Wood, Christian apologist. And tonight's topic is how apologetics saves lives. And it's true. David will definitely go into that, but apologetics. Could you just? We'll go right into it. And David's here from visiting in town. We have this marathon here at Trinity Broadcast Network, and we're excited to have this time to be with you all, our viewers, our listeners, friends in the faith, and perhaps even some enemies. We'll be getting into some discussions later on with some other folks that are calling in, and we'll be giving you a chance as a viewer to call in as well at 248-416-1300. David, what is apologetics? And by the way, good to see you again.
You too. Apologetics. Well, lots of people could explain, the purpose and the role of apologetics. Some would put it in the category of a part of evangelism, but it comes from a word that basically means give a rational defense, and the context in 1 Peter, where we're actually commanded to be apologists, is 1 Peter 3:15, and the context there is that Christians are being persecuted. He's addressing Christians who are being horribly persecuted, but he tells them to set apart Christ as Lord, and to always be prepared to give an answer for everyone who asks for a reason for the hope that we have. So apologetics is just a term meaning how we go about obeying Christ by giving a defense for what we believe. So when people ask us, especially in that context where it's in the context of persecution, it's persecutors coming who are challenging Christians. But it's a different atmosphere today, but it's the same idea. People are asking us, why do you have this hope? Why do you believe in Jesus? Why do you think He's Lord? We are to give responses. We talked about that on our previous program, and what's interesting is that this command comes from Peter, who's a fisherman, as opposed to Paul. We're also supposed to be apologists according to Paul, but it's just interesting that the fisherman says you need to be apologists. Because the point there is, it's not just for scholars. It's not just for philosophers or theologians. It's for Christians in general. That everyone needs to be ready to give an answer for why we have hope in Jesus.
You said everyone when earlier the verse says always. So, but isn't it sometimes? I would say it's sometimes and some people. In other words, we're all as Christians. As Christian people, Christians that are watching this program, Christians that read the Scriptures, Christians that read the Bible and go to church regularly and pray and sing and fellowship, we're expected, we should have the desire to always be ready to share our faith, to always be ready to defend. When I think of apologists, I think of an apology, but we're not making an apology for the faith.
It's going back. They're related. They're related.
Okay.
Originally, an apology was you be giving some sort of explanation for why you did this, and
Okay.
But if you think about how this was used in the ancient world, Plato's Apology, the Apology of Socrates, is where Socrates is giving his defense before the court in Athens. Socrates was about 1,000,000 miles away from apologizing. He really ticked everyone off. And when it came time for sentencing, They said, what should be your sentence for all the things you've done? He said, I should get free meals for life. I mean, he had a real, because I should be treated as a hero, right, because of the things I've done for this city. So he's not apologizing in the sense that we are, but he is giving a defense. He's explaining why he's done everything that he did. He explained it, I was out of love for the city that I went around annoying all of you to try and wake you all up out of the sleep you're in so that you start thinking and figuring out why you believe what
That was his motivation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What is your motivation?
I was an atheist for a long time. I did my best to live accordingly, and I ended up doing some things that I wish I had not done. And after I became a Christian, I really wished that people had shown me before that there was a reason to believe in Christianity. I thought it was ridiculous nonsense. When I would challenge Christians, they would back down and say, hey, we don't want any conflict here. They didn't want to start an argument, right? So they would go into retreat mode. And later on, I find out that Christianity is true. And why was I not told this just from the time I'm born? Why was I not given this information? Why is this not common knowledge? And so with me, I know there are other people out there who are like that, right? Who would like to listen, who would like to know that Christianity is true. And so
Are Christians more like the sheep or the shepherd?
Depends on
Loaded
what you
question.
mean. Depends. Yeah, that can mean different things. Yeah,
Followers or leaders?
we're both.
Okay.
We're both.
Okay.
Right? Yeah, we're supposed to be both. Yeah.
We're supposed to be both.
Uh-huh.
How can we demonstrate our leadership as Christian people? We're in a program that's called Time to Wake Up.
Mm-hmm.
Now's the time to wake up. Why? Why wake up now?
I mean, think about the topic that apologetics saves lives, right? So, I mean, there are lots of ways to answer your question. There are lots of different things that Christians can do. But the people we're talking about, that we talked about in the last program and this program, people are converting to Islam based on horrible arguments because they never got anything else, right? They weren't given a solid foundation for why they believed what they believed by their parents. And so when a Muslim preacher comes along and challenges them, they don't have any clue what they're doing, and they convert to Islam because they don't know. They've never been given any reason to think that Christianity is true. They convert to Islam, and some of them actually realize that Islam commands them to wage jihad. They go out and do it. And how different could things have been if they'd just been told the truth about Islam and the truth about Christianity? And so, I mean, if you're looking at world events, it's not just the guys we're talking about now. There are people who are going to come along next year and next year and next year and next year who are going to wage jihad because they converted to Islam.
Right.
And haven't been told the truth. And so one of the things that Christians need to play an active role in doing, we need to know the truth. We need to know why we believe what we believe. We need to be apologists. We need to be able to refute anything that stands up against Christianity, and stop. We don't want to cause offense or hurt anyone's feelings here.
In light of, as we see behind you, behind me as well, footage of 9/11. In light of 9/11, which was at this date 12 years ago, 13 years ago, one would think as an American that we would never, I would say Americans would say we won't ever forget that and don't ever forget it. But in light of what happened and who caused what happened, is it somewhat surprising that we're somewhat passive and still, and most Americans, out of touch and not informed enough about what's really going on in Islam, especially since we actually had on our own soil 13 years ago a horrible attack that killed thousands of people?
Yeah, and the problem's kind of even worse now because we've just been bombarded by the media and by politicians with claims that Islam is peaceful and wonderful and tolerant, and that's true Islam, and all the people who are actually doing what the Quran says, those are the people who have hijacked the religion. So whereas before, if you're talking about the 90s, if you walked up to someone and said, hey, what's Islam all about? They got no clue what Islam's all about, right? Whereas lots of people nowadays would think that they know something about Islam because they've seen, a program on ABC News about Islam. They've watched a PBS special on how wonderful Muhammad was. They've watched these things and now they think we know. Now we know something about Islam. When they don't, they're getting the watered-down, whitewashed Walt Disney version of Islam from TV, and that so. Before, people don't know much of anything about it, and so this allows you to come along and say, here's what Islam teaches, and oh, okay. Whereas now, no, we know that Islam is peaceful and wonderful, tolerant because we saw the programs with our own eyes, which means that you guys who are saying something else well, you must be evil hate mongers, and you're just like ISIS, right? You're just you're like those guys.
Well, let me ask you this. Okay, so and I know we got to take a break in a short while here, and just a reminder, we will be taking calls eventually at 248-416-1300, and we appreciate everyone calling, and we're glad to have folks watching our program tonight on the Trinity Broadcast Network. And this is great work that's going on here, and it's certainly one that is necessary and very timely. When you talked earlier about people, in fact, more footage as I'm watching young children, that have guns in their hands and are raised up, perhaps to believe nothing else but Islam. Loaded question here: if you were Satan, and you were going to start a religion, what would you do? How would you get people to believe that what you have is the truth when ultimately it wasn't? Would it be Islam?
Well, think about how brilliant Islam is. If I didn't believe in Christianity and didn't believe in God, I would have to start wondering if God exists based on Islam, right? Not because I think that it's from God, but how diabolically brilliant it is. If you think about it in a spiritual context, the gospel, according to Christianity, Jesus taught a lot of things in the Gospels, but the takeaway message, the message that the apostles took away and carried around with them, they always preached his death on the cross for sins, his resurrection from the dead, and that he is Lord. You need to submit to him. Mm-hmm. So they always focused on death, deity, and resurrection. We're also told in the New Testament, false teachers, false prophets are going to come. And what are they going to corrupt? They're going to corrupt the gospel. Islam comes along, Muhammad comes along, and he says, hey, you Christians, you believe in God? So do I. You believe Jesus was born of a virgin? So do I. You believe he lived the most miraculous life in history? So do I. You believe that he's the Messiah? So do I. I agree with you on all these things. There are just these three little things that we have to deny. Jesus didn't die on the cross. He didn't rise from the dead. He didn't claim to be Lord. So it's almost like, how perfect can you be, right? Because they're agreeing with us on, who agrees with us on the virgin birth, right? Who agrees with us that Jesus is the Messiah? They're agreeing with us on things that almost no one else would ever agree with us on. So it sounds like, we have all this common ground and so on, and the things they're going to disagree on are the core elements of the gospel. So, it's almost like too perfect. It's almost too perfect. And then when it goes on to how it really spreads by, appealing to sort of the lower appetites of man. Hey, you want to go out and get a bunch of women and a bunch of, take a bunch of people's stuff and make them serve you and stuff like that. Yeah, we're going to do that. And God wants it. That's what God wants you to do. He wants you can have multiple wives and all your sex slaves and things like that, and let's go and kill and do it. And there are lots of people who want to do that. And hey, that's how we're gonna spread the message. But even then, it proceeds in stages. When Muslims are outnumbered, they're taught to promote peace and tolerance. So there are wonderful, peaceful, tolerant verses in the Quran. Right. It's when they're able to control an area that you kill and slaughter and rape and everything else. And so what it does is it allows Muslims to go in a place like the United States, where they're a small minority, to open up the Quran and say, look, there's no compulsion in religion. See, it's perfectly tolerant. And then you read it, you're right, that is what it says. I guess all these guys in the Middle East who are trying to compel people and force people to convert, they've all got it wrong, because I read it right here with my own eyes. Well, yeah, you read it with your own eyes because that's what Muhammad commanded. That the main idea is whatever is best for the Muslim community in a given set of circumstances, that's what you do and that's what you teach. And in a context where Muslims make up 1 or 2% of the population, peace and tolerance is the way to go. Where they make up 50, 60, 70, 80%, subjugate everyone is the way to go. And so, but think about how brilliant that is, that today, no matter how many people get their heads chopped up, there could be a terrorist attack tomorrow, right, that kills thousands of people right here in the United States. Every news reporter would be on TV telling us this has nothing to do with, the President of the United States would be on TV. This has nothing to do with Islam. Why? Because the Quran has all these peaceful teachings in it, and we're in this amazing situation of the more violent Islam becomes, the more we defend it. And I mean, this has to be something spiritual here. There has to be something behind this.
You know, does it appear to you that Islam, radical Islam, has become, I'll use the word trendy? Like, it's almost cool to be an Islamic jihadist. You know, it's like, well, nothing else is working for me. I'm going to do that. But what I don't understand is why anyone that has any kind of rationale in their brain, that they would defend it by doing the things that people do, like sever people's heads, disfigure people's faces and bodies, and bomb churches and do terrible things to children. And I don't understand. How can that be? How can you defend those types of that behavior? I don't understand that.
Well, it's if you believe you've been commanded by God to do something,
Okay.
you have one heck of a reason to do it. Whether you're commanded to love your neighbor as yourself and to pray for those who persecute you.
Okay.
As Christianity teaches, to love even your enemies. If that's what you're commanded to do, doesn't mean everyone's going to do it, because you have different degrees of faithfulness, right? You have different degrees of sort of dedication. Some people will be extremely dedicated. These are people who will go, to their deaths trying to bring the gospel to people, or trying to help people in other countries and so on. But then you have the same thing in Islam, where you have various degrees of dedication. And if you are, I'm going to do whatever Allah commands, you open up the Quran, fight those who do not believe in Allah, you're going to fight those who do not believe in Allah.
So, but think of it this way: if as a Christian, if I am compelled by love to love someone else, even if they're persecuting me, because I believe I have a loving God that loves me, okay, that's consistent. But as a Muslim, why would do I think Allah is a loving God? If so, how would a loving God tell me that I need to destroy a church or disfigure a face?
According to the Quran, Allah only loves good Muslims. If you reject Islam, Allah does not love you. And that affects how we'd be treated. If you're chopping off the head of a journalist who's already people don't understand, these guys are under death sentences just because they pay taxes to the U.S. or British government, right? If according to Muhammad, anyone who funds a military that is doing anything to Muslims is equally responsible for what that military does. So if these guys, we're paying taxes to the U.S. government, the U.S. government goes, we're all under a death sentence. That was Osama bin Laden's justification when people accused him of killing innocent people in 9/11, right? Hey, you killed all these innocent people. What are you talking about? They're all under a death sentence. They're funding the U.S. government, which is over here making war in Muslim lands. What do you mean innocent? What are you talking about, right? So, and he's exactly correct according to Muhammad and according to the Quran. So there's no problem there with God being
That's
loving.
consistent.
Yeah, it's exactly how I would reason. When I say this, I'm telling you exactly what I would think if I were a Muslim. I would say, here, Allah claims that His commands are completely clear. He claims that His commands are completely clear. He says things like, fight those who do not believe in Allah. Do not take the Jews and Christians for friends. They are friends of each other. He makes all these kinds of commands. And you, as a Muslim, don't get to reinterpret what He says. You don't get to say, I don't like that, so He must mean something else. Allah has not left that door. Open. Now, we want to get to some of the material to see how this sort of fleshes out.
Can we take a call?
Yeah, we have a call. We also have on the program, we have on Skype, we'll have Anthony Rogers for the first hour, and Matt Slick is going to be with us for the second hour. So we want to introduce those guys.
Okay.
We get a chance.
That was my slip up as the host. So
it's fine. I mean, we're still in the introduction phase, introducing the topic.
We'll say we are. Well, we do have a call, and it's from Joseph. And Joseph, we're ready for your question, sir. Can we hear you?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Awesome. Guys, I just wanted to say I apologize. I came in a little late. I didn't catch the name of the speaker, the guest that you have on there now. But David, I just wanted to say thank you so much for the ministry that you're doing. It's inspired me very heavily in the last few years, just being able to get into both my own Bible and getting into the Quran and learning different things, and being able to speak and hold conversation with Muslims and trying to win them to Christ. Just really quickly, I just wanted to say that it's interesting with everything that's going on right now with ISIS overseas. A couple years ago, there were lots of conversation about what could happen and what might happen. But I've had many of my educated friends have master's degrees. They're all under the impression that terrorism is due to poverty and poor education. And my main point is now is how do they explain, people who are coming from wealthy families, who are very well educated, coming from all over, going and helping ISIS. I mean, it's very interesting when you consider the fact that the crutch of their argument is that terrorists only do what they do because they're stupid and they don't have any money. Well, now you've got one of the most well-funded groups ever who are representing Islam, recruiting people from the wealthiest countries, and they're in their right mind, So how do you explain that as a person who's well educated? You have your degrees. How now can you defend Islam?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It's just we even have leaders who say this. John Kerry is famous for insisting that that terrorism comes down to poverty and so on. And on the surface, there should be an obvious problem with that. There are Christians in poverty, right? There are Jews in poverty. There are Hindus in horrible poverty. I mean, if you saw Slumdog Millionaire, I mean, there's horrible poverty, right? Why don't any of these other groups decide, hey, we're going to go start chopping off people's heads and suicide bomb? Why is it only the Muslims who are in poverty? So even if we went with that, we'd have to say there's something wrong here, because poverty that spreads across all religions and ideologies. It's only one that seems to explode into violence and terrorism and suicide bombings. So there'd be a problem there. But apart from that, Osama bin Laden was worth what, like $50 million? Osama bin Laden was rich. Zawahiri is very intelligent. I mean, he had a doctorate. The current leader of ISIS, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, he has a PhD in Islamic studies, right? This is an educated scholar. And so it's, in recruiting, poverty can play a role. If you're walking up to someone who's poor and you say, hey, join me and we're going to go fight these people and take their stuff and take their women and so on, that can certainly help versus someone who already has all of that because they have tons of money. But I mean, the leaders are very well educated, many of them very well funded, and so what you have is an entire spectrum from very wealthy, very educated, down to poor, and everyone agrees and ends up agreeing on the same thing, namely, this book is telling us that we have to wage jihad, and in order to obey Allah, we have to do that. And so you're absolutely right. And again, all you have to do is open the book, and you'll find out why, whether you're poor or you're rich, you are going to have people who are taking this seriously. People who come from Western nations. They weren't oppressed by the American military or anything like that. So why are they becoming terrorists? And it just comes down to, am I going to do whatever this book says? If you say yes to that, then you are stuck with some very, very violent commands.
Mm-hmm. Joseph, we appreciate your call, and we thank you for tuning in and for supporting the program tonight. Mm-hmm. And we're going to move along. We actually do have Matt Slick is actually waiting on Skype, so we'll be going to Matt shortly. Mm-hmm. You mentioned the word brilliant earlier. Mm-hmm. It is amazing. You have these influential and wealthy leaders, and I one thing that I don't know if I want to use the word admire, but I will. When I think of Islamic terrorists, for one, you can't threaten them with death. Mm-hmm. They are very patient. They are very persistent. They're if we would only have this type of radical love, as opposed to I'll just call it radical hate and evil that they demonstrate, we would be probably closer to where we should be living. But they are persistent, consistent, horrible in what they do, but they continue to grow and get more and more popular and have more authority. What do you do? What do you do about about their growth? I mean, we're here to talk about how apologetics saves lives, and now is the time to wake up. What do we do?
Well, I actually believe it's not that hard to deal with, right? It's, you'd think, look, I mean, they're killing and slaughtering and chopping people's heads off, and what can you do apart from just annihilating the civilization and just blowing everyone up or something like that, or nuking it like some people suggest? What is there apart from that? I don't think you have to do any of that. I think you have to stop protecting Islam from criticism. Stop calling people a racist and bigots and hate mongers for telling the truth about what Islam teaches. I don't think Islam can stand up to criticism. If you actually lay out the truth about Muhammad, that he had sex with a 9-year-old girl, that he had more wives than his own revelations allow, if you lay out the rape of the female captives and the fact that he thought he was demon possessed when he first started receiving revelations, that he was suicidal, he tried to hurl himself off a cliff, that he thought he was a victim of black magic later. He was acting weird, and when he popped out of it, he said they had cast a spell on him. When you put all of this out there, it's almost unbelievable. There were, I mean, it's like ridiculous that anyone could ever take this seriously. Now, if you lay all of that out on the table, if that information becomes common knowledge, if that's the sort of thing, which directly from the Muslim sources, if that's the sort of thing that we saw on ABC News and CNN and PBS, to where it became common knowledge, you'd still have people who believe in Islam, but you're not going to have Western converts running to join jihad based on this, right? So you would still have people who, I'm just going to believe in this no matter how silly and absurd it is. But I don't think you'd see people converting to Islam. It's just, and the reason I say that, I have never in my life met someone who converted to Islam after doing a careful study of it. You convert to Islam based on some silly, nonsensical argument that you didn't study, you didn't examine, you had no clue what you're talking about, and you believed it. And then it's later that you get some of the facts about Islam that tell you to wage jihad and so on. So based on the fact that of all the converts I've ever met, I've never met one who studied Islam, who knew these things about Islam before converting, I would conclude that people who find these things out don't convert to Islam. And so if we make them common knowledge, I think we're not going to have the same sorts of problems. So there are people who think, oh, it's such a huge problem, we would just have to become very violent and so on. No, stop protecting Islam from criticism. It can't stand up to criticism. People will leave Islam, lots of people will, if they learned the truth, and no one would convert to it if they knew what it taught. Well,
at this point, I appreciate that, David, and we've got a lot of things to talk about. Well, we're going to have to take a quick break here, so stay with us. Again, get ready to stand by for any calls at 248-416-1300. Again, a quick break for now, and come right back, and we'll see you soon. And welcome back from our break, and we're going to get right back into it here. Again, now is a time to wake up. Apologetics saves lives. Speaking of apologetics, we've got Matt Slick calling in from Skype. Matt, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good, guys. Sorry, I'm doing great, and sorry to keep you waiting.
Hey, Matt, how you doing?
Hey, Dave. How you doing, buddy? Doing fine.
Good. Hey, Matt, before we actually get started, you and I recorded a series on Islam a while back, right?
Yes, and it's almost ready to release. We've had some major setbacks, not in that stuff, but some other stuff at the intergalactic Karm Empire. So we're still getting our heads out from a deluge of problems and issues with servers and stuff like this. So we're not quite there, but once we do get that going, we're going to get that thing released. It's basically ready for the final review.
So where should people be watching for that?
Well, on the Karm website, carm.org. Once it's released, we're going to put it on the home page, and home page gets about 60, 70,000 page views a day. So we'll be getting get a lot of people notified about it, plus the radio show and everything else we can do. Let people know. And we'll let you know, too, so you can push it, too.
All right, so for everyone who's out there, we talk a lot about various issues topically here, but Matt and I put together sort of a step-by-step course for all the introductory issues that you would need to know in apologetics dealing with Islam and responding to Muslim objections and so on. So if you want something sort of taking you through all the basics, you'll want to keep in contact with Matt's website there.
That website would be...
It's karm.org.
Okay. That's right.
All right,
C-A-R-M.
Now, Matt, we've been talking about apologetics here. What would we already talked about it a bit, but what would your because you're an apologist? How would you describe apologetics for everyone?
Well, apologetics has two main aspects: an affrontive and defensive, or affront and defense. We can attack, we can defend. And apologetic comes from the Greek word apologia in 1 Peter 3:15, which you nailed earlier, and it means to make a defense. So what we do is we defend the Christian faith. Now, there's two important verses that people need to know about. Pastors and elders need to know about this. 2 Corinthians 10:5, we are destroying speculations and every lofty thing raised up against the knowledge of God. That means that we can go out there and we can believe and trust in the Lord to be able to refute any attack on the faith. And the gates of hell will not overpower the Christian church. That's Matthew 16:18. Gates of hell don't come and get us. We go attack the gates. Gates don't do anything. They're defensive. What the Lord is telling us is that we're supposed to be aggressive in a godly way, but we're not supposed to be passive and weak. We're supposed to practice apologetics by informing people of the truth, by using reason, using Scripture, and letting people know what that truth is so they can find, hopefully, by God's grace, the truth of salvation in Jesus Christ.
All right, now Matt, it's that, of course, is all lead-in to our topic of apologetics saving lives, and that's, for lots of us, especially in the West, if we're thinking about apologetics, it's, giving a reasoned defense, but it's, for lots of people, it's just, it's okay, you've got this worldview and we have that worldview, and it's a competition of worldviews that doesn't have a lot of practical consequences in the world. And what we want to talk about here is this has incredible practical consequences in the world, because people are influenced more or less, they act more or less based on what they believe. Some people will, everyone goes with what they believe, but I'm talking about their religious views. Some people do, will try to do exactly what their religion commands. Other people will just show up for the particular holy day that they believe in each year. But here, it's so many of the huge terrorist incidents in recent years have had something to do with converts to Islam. On the last program, we mentioned the 7/7 bomber and his wife in the UK were both converts to Islam. She's the White Widow. She's one of the most wanted people in the world. She's a convert to Islam. Michael Adebolajo and Michael Adebowile, the people who beheaded Lee Rigby, were both converts to Islam. People told them about Islam. They believed it. Some of the recent terrorist attacks we've had in America, one in Canada and one in Oklahoma, where a woman had her head chopped off. They were both converts to Islam. And you can go to these people if they have pages that could be publicly accessed, which in the case of the Canadian and the Alton Nolan in Oklahoma, they both had Facebook pages where they put their arguments on the page, and they're ridiculing Christianity without obviously not understanding what Christians believe. And they're giving some of the most horrible arguments for Islam that I've ever seen. And these guys become so confident that Islam is true based on absolute nonsense, and then they go out and kill because the book commands them to wage jihad. And so this is a situation where it seems like, if we had actually if people had actually at least explained the basics of what Christianity teaches and explained the basics of why Christians believe certain things, and explained why Islam self-destructs and is incoherent and that Muhammad can't be a prophet, there might be people alive today who are not alive because they were killed based on these ideologies that people just had no clue about Christianity and no clue what Islam is. And so let's get a picture of the guy we're talking about here. Let's get a picture up on the screen of this. Is the man himself. Here we have picture before he converted to Islam, and we have a picture after he converted to Islam. And here we're not concerned at all about how he's dressed. That's irrelevant. But the point is, he obviously started taking things seriously. And this is Martin Couture-Rouleau, and he is the guy who attacked some people up in Canada with his car before he was run off the road and shot to death when he charged a female police officer, with a knife. But you could go to his Facebook page. It was taken down, but you could go to his Facebook page, and it's covered. It's covered with attacks on Christianity and very, very weak arguments for Islam. But this apparently he found incredibly persuasive, that he had the truth on his side. And so I wanted to look at a couple of these. We have some callers waiting, so we'll take a look at one of these slides very, very quickly. We'll get to a couple callers, and then we can get back to them. But let's go ahead and have the next slide up, where we can look at one of his claims.
This is actually from...
Yes, this is from his site.
Right.
And notice it's a picture of Jesus here. You'd have to wonder why Muslims who flip out over pictures of Muhammad are so quick to put up a picture of Jesus. Mm-hmm. But Matt, I'd like you to take a look at what he says here, because this is, according to Martin Couture-Rouleau, what Christianity teaches. And you can see how silly Christianity is by what it teaches. So we have here, I'll go ahead and read it. Jesus says, "It's like this. I created man and woman with original sin. Then I destroyed most of them for sinning. Then I impregnated a woman with myself as her child, so that I could be born. Later I will kill myself as a sacrifice to myself to save all of you from the sin I gave you in the first place." Now, Matt, would you regard that as an accurate description of Christianity?
Well, of course not. I've seen that before, as a matter of fact, and atheists often use that as well. But like atheists, Muslims are often irrational. They do not think clearly. They're not interested in the facts. They're only interested in promoting misrepresentation so that they can justify their hatred, their bigotry, and their anger. But God did not create man and woman with original sin. That's just wrong. He created Adam and Eve to be good. They were without sin. And just from the very beginning, the guy quoting this, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And that's very often the case. As I've debated Muslims before, they don't know what to criticize very well. At least you, Dave, and myself, and others on this show, we seek to properly represent Islam. We study what it actually teaches. But I don't see any Muslims actually studying what Christianity really teaches. That is a blatant misrepresentation. In fact, I'm thinking about writing an article quoting that and then just tackling point by point and putting it up on Karm. demonstrating its foolishness.
And yeah, it's I mean, it's really amazing what you pointed out, that we're human, we make mistakes, but we are trying to
Yes.
get to the bottom of what Islam teaches. We try, we may fail sometimes, but we try. If you see me make a mistake about Islam, it's not because I was trying to make a mistake about Islam. I was trying to get it right, and maybe I failed. But
Well, that's what I respect about you.
Yeah.
See, Dave, I've known you for a while. We've spent a lot of hours together and stuff in person. And one of the things I really enjoy about you is that you do your homework, you do your studies, and you represent the opposing view as accurately as possible. And because you know it so well, you are able to properly dissect it. That's an admirable quality. Study that which is false so that you can absolutely, positively represent it accurately in order to show why it's false. That's what you do. Good job.
And the flip side, though, right? The flip side is you have lots of Muslims, and it's not everyone here. There are Muslim apologists who try to be accurate, but it's so incredibly common among Muslims to just flat out misrepresent Christianity and not to care at all, right? It's false garbage, so who cares if everything we're saying about it is wrong, right? There's no respect for accurately representing it. But what's interesting is it's almost as if it goes back to their God, right? In the Quran, Allah tries to explain the Trinity, and He says it's made up of Allah, Jesus, and Mary, who sort of act as one, right? And that's what Allah sets out to refute as a refutation of the Trinity in the Quran. For people out there who want to read it, it's chapter 5, verse 116 of the Quran. It's the only description of the Trinity you get in the Quran. It's Allah, Jesus, and Mary, who are three separate gods who all sort of work together as the Trinity. And this is what, Matt, historically, heretical and non-heretical, how many Christians, heretical or not, taught that as the doctrine of the Trinity historically?
I'm not aware of anybody who's taught
No one is. And when I ask Muslims, point them out, where they can't do it. And so what in the world is Allah responding to? But think about that. If Allah doesn't have to represent Christianity correctly when He's responding to it, why should Muslims? So you see how the theology plays a role in what we believe.
Allah is the greatest of deceivers, and they're allowed to practice taqiyya, the act of deception. So why represent the enemy properly? And that's what the false religions do, is very often they misrepresent Christianity in order to attack it. They're not interested in truth, they're interested in victory. Mm-hmm. That is not godly, that is ungodly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, why not? All right, did you want to get to some of the callers?
We're ready for a caller. If we have one on the line, we're ready. Hello, and welcome to the Trinity Channel.
Hello?
What's your name? Hello. I'm
Hello?
sorry, what's your...
Yeah, we hear you.
Hi there.
Hi.
What's your name?
Oh, Brad.
Ron.
Brad.
I'm sorry, Brad.
Hey, okay.
Sorry.
I got a question for David, I guess.
All right.
Okay.
As it pertains to this, because I guess your topic tonight is that the apologists save lives, but I'm wondering in the purely secular sphere, right?
Yeah.
When you're explaining to someone, when you see something like these murders that have just happened, how they are Islamic and how they are just following what Muhammad has taught them to do, they get offended at you and paint you in the same light as the murderers for even daring to say such a thing, and then they turn it around on you as if you're some weird extremist yourself. I'm wondering how to defend from falling into that weird trap, which is always the way it happens, and for whatever reason it does.
Yeah, and I've seen that accusation pretty much every day for weeks now. Namely, if you say the Quran teaches these things, if you say the Quran teaches Muslims to wage jihad and to fight unbelievers and to subjugate people and to take female captives and so on, if you say that, well, you're interpreting the Quran just like ISIS does. So you're sort of, and Teresa Corbin was a convert to Islam. She wrote an article explaining why she converted. I pointed out that almost everything she said about Islam was completely false, and she had no clue what she was talking about. But then when I gave some verses, she said, the people who say the Quran means these horrible things are the flip side of the same coin of ISIS. And in a way that's true. We both read the Quran how it's meant to be read. And, you know, this is how, if you're talking to someone and you know, obviously if you only get a sentence or two, you won't have time to lay this out. But what you'd want to lay out for someone, if the person is actually, if you're in a conversation, you don't have to jump straight to jihad. You can take the person step by step, showing the process that would lead someone from ISIS to conclude that Islam commands them to go wage jihad. And I would start with some verses in the Quran showing that the Quran claims to be perfectly clear, at least in its commands. So various passages in the Quran, it's throughout the Quran, and I have a video on this if you want to watch it. But the Quran over and over claims to be the clear book. These are verses of the clear book. It's fully explained, it's expounded in detail. In other words, Allah, he just had all eternity to get the Quran exactly as he wanted it, and so he said exactly what he meant. So his teachings are perfectly clear. Step 2, Allah demands complete submission to his commands. He says if you don't submit fully to his commands and to the commands of Muhammad, you have no real faith. You have no faith. You're not a real Muslim unless you just blindly submit to whatever he says. Well, if his commands are perfectly clear and true believers will do exactly what he says, that doesn't leave much room for reinterpretation or for me to say what I think Allah meant was something else. And so if you're someone who's reading the Quran in that context, if you take people through those verses, the Quran claims to be clear, Allah demands complete submission to what he says, then once you've gotten a person to understand how the Quran is laying down its own method of interpretation, then you say, all right, it says here, fight those who do not believe in Allah. Tell me what that means. And if you say it means anything other than fight those who do not believe in Allah, well, you've just violated everything you've just read and agreed to about what the Quran is claiming about itself. In other words, if you say what it really means is fight in self-defense or fight people who are attacking you, well, in Allah's perfectly clear word, if that's what he meant, he would have said that, right? And if you as a Muslim say what he really means is, well, now you're claiming to be more clear than Allah in his perfectly clear eternal word.
Right.
If that verse means fight those who are attacking you, Allah is a horrible, horrible communicator, right? And just imagine a scenario here. Imagine Barack Obama comes out tomorrow and says, we will fight Muslims. CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, ISNA, all these groups would go ballistic. How dare you say fight Muslims? Now suppose everyone calls out Obama. How dare you say that we need to fight Muslims? And suppose he said, well, I'm talking about ISIS. We are fighting these people, right? Wouldn't they say you need to be very, very specific if you're talking about going out fighting and killing and stuff? You need to be extremely specific. Well, think about that we would demand complete precision if you're talking about killing someone from President of the United States or from a guy down the street. If a guy down the street starts talking about killing someone, we're going to want to know exactly what he's talking about. You can't just issue general blanket statements. Any Muslim would understand that if you're talking about anyone. But then we get to Allah, who says, fight those who do not believe in Allah. And they say, oh, well, he must mean something else. Well, if he meant something else, and he's talking about fighting and killing, and he issues this blanket command, fight those who do not believe, but he really means much more specific group, why is it okay for Allah to, cause so many millions of deaths over the centuries by not saying what he actually meant? There's nothing in the context there. The context there starts in verse 28 of chapter 9. It goes through verse 33. That's the entire passage. There's not one word about fighting people or attacking you, fighting in self-defense, anything. It's all fighting people based on what they believe. And so if Allah meant something completely different from what he says there, he is a horrible, horrible, horrible communicator. And so especially if you're talking to a Muslim, are you telling me that Allah is just this bad a communicator? Because this is a guy who's bragging constantly about how clear he is. And if he's that horrible a communicator when he claims to be perfectly clear, he's like one of these people who go on American Idol claiming that they're the best singer in the world, and then the judges tell him, hey, you sound like a drowning cat trying to escape the pool by clawing its way up a chalkboard or something like that. he's really, really bad, claiming to be really, really clear. And so anyway, I try to lay all that out. But I have a video where I go, it's like a 50-minute lecture where I go step by step through that. It's called something like how ISIS recruits young converts or something like that.
Is that available on your website, David?
It's on YouTube. If you type in how ISIS, yeah, I'll tell it to you in a minute. I'll look up what the title was.
Brad, thank you for calling, and we're going to move forward here. We got another caller, Dixon. Dixon, are you on the line with us still?
Hello?
Hello, could you speak up, Dixon?
Hello?
Hello, that's better. Thank you. What's your question?
Yeah, it's a privilege to talk to you. Actually, my question is to Muslims. It refers mostly to Muslims. It's, I wanted to ask Muslims this, that if some guy comes, like right now, and he claims to come after Muhammad with a new book, asking his followers to kill all Muslims, are Muslims really going to follow him? Because
No.
that's the same thing they're asking us Christians to do.
I didn't catch that part.
Okay, I say if a new guy comes like down the street and he comes with a new book, he claims to be the last prophet,
Yeah.
asking his followers to fight Muslims, are Muslims going to follow him? That's the question.
No. Muslims would say that Muhammad is the last prophet. He's the seal of the prophets. So if you're going where I think you're going with this, it's that someone came along and then told, say, hey, I'm a prophet, and now everyone has to go and kill and do what I say. Muslims would reject that because they already have their system, and it says Muhammad's the last prophet. But that's kind of like what Islam sounds to Christians, right? Jesus says it's finished. Jesus
exactly
says,
what I'm.
yeah.
That's my point.
So thank you, brother, for sharing that. And yeah, I agree. And that's what Islam sounds like. Jesus, he enters creation, he dies on the cross for sins, he rises from the dead, and he ascends, and the kingdom of God has entered. It's with us. And then Muhammad comes along centuries later, and totally different message. And not just giving a totally different message, but he's saying Jesus agreed with him, despite the fact that Jesus totally contradicts Muhammad on basic doctrines. And so, yeah, it's a huge problem. But yeah, you can't believe it. And actually, there's an actual example you can use. It doesn't have to be a hypothetical guy who's coming along to kill. You can use the example of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, who founded a group called the Ahmadiyas, who claim to be the true Muslims. They believe that Mirza Ghulam Ahmad was the promised Messiah, the second coming of Jesus, who came along after Muhammad and gave his official interpretations of the Muslim sources. Muslims kill Ahmadis in places like Pakistan and Indonesia. They will kill them as heretics or apostates. And so what you can do is, why would you not accept Mirza Ghulam Ahmad as a true prophet after Muhammad? Well, because he's contradicting Muhammad. Well, maybe your interpretations were all wrong, because we have this guy. They will never accept it, and then you can draw the conclusion. Guess what? That's what we feel about Muhammad. He comes along, he tries to change everything. He can't give any reason why we should change it. He can't explain how Christians got everything wrong, and so that's how we feel.
The irony is they have so many people that follow from a source like that. I'm not sure if we have time before our break, but we do have another caller. We'll see if we can sneak it in. It's Terry. Terry, how are you?
Hey guys, how are you doing?
Doing great, Terry. What's your question?
Real quick, just thank you for what you do. And I started a Christian apologetics group on Facebook because I found this network. Actually, while my father was dying, so you guys were a blessing, and I just wanted to tell you, you guys help more people than you think sometimes.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you.
And real quick, I'm moving because I've been in the conservative movement for years, but now I moved into Christian apologetics, and that's a whole different deal. We just had Act for America come in, our local Tea Party, and retired Army Colonel Roman Golash came in. And I'll tell you what, the looks on people's faces every time he comes in, it just blows me away. People just don't know, and it baffles me. Mm-hmm. But I want to ask a question. When debating Muslims, okay, I try to get them to read Isaiah 14, Daniel 11, and Ezekiel 28 to 38. Mm-hmm. Can you guys think of any others that, that would help in that department?
Isaiah 53.
Okay.
Isaiah 9, 6, and 7. Let's get Matt on here. Matt, and I assume are you specifically appealing to Old Testament prophecies?
Well, not necessarily. I've even debated on Sam's page. I had one Muslim. I told him, let's both pray to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Come back in a month and talk about what we've learned. He told me to drink poison, so that was a fun one.
Yeah. Oh! By the way, you can use the Muslim sources to put them in the same. They get that from Ahmed Deedat, but you can actually use the Muslim sources to put them in the same situation.
Yeah. Have you? I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but debating Marxist atheists and Islamists is basically the same thing. It's the same circular arguments, mm-hmm. and they both accuse you of the very thing they're guilty of. It's mm-hmm. amazing.
Yeah. So basically, were you asking what passages of the Bible you would want Muslims to? You would try to get Muslims to read?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. Yeah, we almost have to go to a break. Let me get let's get Matt on here and ask Matt. Matt, if you're on Facebook or you're having a conversation with a Muslim, and if you wanted to take him through a few passages of Scripture, what would you try to get him to read?
Well, along the same lines of what the caller's talking about, Zechariah 12:10 is very useful because God is speaking, and he says that they will look upon me, whom they have pierced, and they'll mourn for him as one mourns for an only son. And it's really an interesting verse. And you can also go to Psalm 22. And one of the things I've done with people is just read Psalm 22, about verses 13 to 18. You'll see in that it's called a pericope, a section of Scripture. You'll see it's a description of the crucifixion. And so what I'll do is I will read that to them and say, what do you think that is? And they'll say, well, it's like Jesus being crucified. About 9 times out of 10 they'll say that. And I'll say, that was written in Psalm 22, which was written 1,000 years before Jesus was born, and crucifixion had not been invented yet by the Phoenicians until 600 BC. So I ask them, how do you explain the Old Testament describing the crucifixion of Jesus? And they don't have an answer. Mm-hmm. Those are two very good places to go to in the Old Testament.
Yeah, I've actually, Sam and I sat down with a convert to Islam, and we told her to read Isaiah 53, and she read it, and we said, who's this talking about? She said, Jesus. I said, yeah, but it was written before Jesus. So these passages can be powerful. But I wanted to add, you don't need to stick with Old Testament prophecies. You can actually you can corner a Muslim even on New Testament passages. So you can go to any passage in Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, show that Jesus died on the cross, that he died for sins, that he rose from the dead, that he is Lord, that he's the divine Son of God. You can quote any of these things, and a Muslim, of course, is going to say, well, it's been corrupted, but you can actually corner him on that issue by quoting the Quran to him, not because we believe the Quran, but because his religion teaches him that he is not allowed to say that. It would be like if I said Jesus rose from the dead, and a Muslim said, "What? That's a miracle. Miracles don't happen." No, you're a Muslim. You can't say that. That is not open to you. That if you're an atheist or an agnostic, maybe you come and say you don't believe in miracles. If you're a Muslim, you have to believe in miracles. And so I wouldn't be siding with the Quran. I'd be pointing out to the Muslim that he has something in his worldview that contradicts what he just said. And you can do the same thing with what Muslims say about when they try to say that the gospel has been corrupted. Basically what you have is, and I have a video titled "The Bible, the Quran, and the Islamic Dilemma." The Bible, the Quran, and the Islamic Dilemma. It's short, but basically I go through verses of the Quran which show that the Quran affirms not only the inspiration of the gospel, where the gospel is a book that the Christians possess, it affirms not only the inspiration but also the preservation and the authority. The Quran commands Christians to judge by the gospel. So if a Muslim tells you, don't judge by the gospel, it's been corrupted, the Quran tells me to judge by the gospel. And this is during the time of Muhammad. So the gospel had been around for years, for centuries, when Muhammad commanded Christians, supposedly from Allah, you need to judge by the gospel. So if a Muslim tells you, your book's been corrupted, don't quote that to me. Sorry, you're contradicting Allah. Go get a new religion. Right?
Time for a break, and thank you, Matt, for...
I wanted to do one more when Matt gets back. Wanted to look at one or two more real quick,
Great.
and then we'll go on, because we only had two things that we want to cover with Anthony on some of the scientific issues. Mm-hmm.
We've got more to come, so stay with us after this quick break, and we'll be right back. Thank you.
Matthew in his gospel says, and this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come.
Okay, welcome back. The time is now to wake up. Apologists save lives, and we got two apologists talking with each other electronically, David Wood and Matt Slick. David.
Yeah, Matt, I wanted to go on to a couple more of these slides. We don't have to spend too much time on them because it's all kind of you only have two ideas. One, they'll be ridiculing Christianity and claiming, some sort of their theology makes sense and ours is absurd. Or they'll be appealing to the Bible somehow to defend what Islam teaches. But let's take a look at the next slide here and see what we got. And again, this is from Martin Couture Rouleau's Facebook page, where he gave his, he gave several. Well, he just had tons of material on why Christianity is false and absurd and why Islam is the truth. But I'll go ahead and read this. Here you have a priest, and you have the word Christianity, and Christianity there is in flames. So this is some evil stuff here. But the priest is saying, my God came from womb of a woman, he was breastfed, had to defecate, played in the streets with kids, and at the age of 33, he was beaten, spit upon, humiliated, mocked, stripped naked, and then hung on a cross, killed, and then was buried. Notice they just leave it there. He's buried. That's the end. And we compare this with Islam, where you have a devout Muslim who's praying, and he says, my God is Allah. There is no other God beside him, the King, the Holy, the one free from all defects, the giver of security, the watcher over his creatures, the Almighty, the Compeller, the Supreme. Glory be to Allah. High is he above all that they associate as partners with him. So Islam has a really pure, wonderful theology, and Christianity is this really weird nonsense. So what do you think about this one, Matt?
Well, I could rip that apart every which way. I mean, there's so many issues. But now here's the thing. A lot of people are going to think that this mockery is a misrepresentation. In one sense it is, but in one sense it is not. It is God who became flesh. Now, we call this in Christian theology, we call this the hypostatic union. And that means that in the one person of Christ are two distinct natures. So we don't say that God himself suckled, because it gets complicated in theology, but we don't say that. We say that the person of Christ did that and was breastfed, and that the person of Christ had two distinct natures. And I love teaching on this topic. It takes for a while. A lot of Christians don't understand it very well, but in this sense, when we say God, we're saying that Jesus is God in flesh. Well, then, yes, he was born of a woman. Yes, he did breastfeed. Yes, he did have to defecate. He played in the street with kids. Well, we assume he did. At the age of 33, was beaten, spit upon, humiliated, mocked, stripped, naked, then hung on a cross, killed, and was buried. Of course, he was resurrected. But I would say to a Muslim, I'd say, yeah, what about it? If he wants to say that this is impossible, I'm going to say, well, wait a minute. Is the Quran not itself the Word of God in physical form? He's going to have to say yes. Well, then, are you saying that God cannot become one of us if he can make his Word, which is perfect and pure, become one of us, and Jesus is called the Word? Why would that be a problem for you? If he's going to become one of us, as the Bible says, made under the law, Galatians 4:4, then he's going to have to be someone who has to walk and talk, to be one of us, to relate to us. But you don't have that in Islam. You don't have that. You have a capricious, arbitrary God who violates his own laws. But at least in Christianity, we have someone, the Lord God, who became one of us to relate to us, to reveal the Father to us, that we might go and have forgiveness of sins and be with him through the sacrifice of Christ. I say, yeah, so what's the big deal? Mm-hmm. That's what I would say.
And it's just interesting, if you, as you pointed out, if you look at what it says, they start off, where does our God come from? Well, we wouldn't say our God comes from a womb. We wouldn't say that's where God comes from, right? In other words, we would want to take it back before then. But in representing our views, it's my God, little g, my God came from womb of a woman. That's where he came from. And then he was breastfed and so on. And then he was killed and buried. So if you look at what they say, that's the whole story of God for us. He was he had his beginning at his birth, and then he died, and that's the end. And oh, how silly is that? And so yeah, it's in order to understand at all what Christians are saying, at least try to get the theology right of the Trinity and the Incarnation and why God did that in order to get an accurate picture. And when you do that, when you unpack it, and then you unpack Islam, there's really no comparison here.
Well, one of the things I'll do, this is a great example of something. When you talk about my God came from a woman, we're talking about Jesus being born. All right. Well, if you look at something like this, you could just ask a Muslim, is that right or is that wrong? Put the onus on him or her to demonstrate why that can or cannot be. And what they're going to be doing at this point is actually giving you rope to hang them with, because their arguments aren't going to be sound. I do this all the time with Muslims, with atheists, with all kinds of people. They'll make a statement, and I'll say, okay, well, demonstrate why your statement is actually the right one. Mm-hmm. Demonstrate what is morally right or morally wrong in it. And I'll tell you, it doesn't take very much to rip them up. Mm-hmm. Because he wants to say, my God came from the womb of a woman. I'm going to say, well, what do you mean? Do you mean that God was created in a woman? Is that what you're going to say? Because we wouldn't teach that if that's what you say. That's not our position. Do you want to know what our position is? Mm-hmm. I very calmly just teach them biblical theology and say that you need to believe you need to at least properly represent us and not lie to us, because if you have to lie in order to advance your cause, well then, is it true? Takia aside. But that's what I do. I just ask them. And you'll find that it's very effective to do that. Analyze what they say. And look, here's a test question of logic, real simple. If you jump high enough, can you touch the moon? Yes, otherwise it's not high enough. Yeah. Often you find the statement or the question that someone asks you has the answer and or the problem inside of it. Ask them what they mean, ask them to verify what they mean, and you'll find that they're going to have a lot of problems doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would add one thing, namely, what if we approached the Quran in the same way that they're approaching our views? Let me read a passage real quick. This is chapter 27 of the Quran, verses 7 through 9. It's the story of Moses in the burning bush. It says, "Remember when Moses said unto his household, Lo, I spy afar off a fire. I will bring you tidings thence, or bring you a borrowed flame, that you may warm yourselves." So Moses sees a fire. He's going to go get part of it to bring back so he can warm his family. "But when he reached it, he was called, saying, Blessed is whosoever is in the fire and whosoever is round about it, and glorified be Allah, the Lord of the worlds. O Moses, lo, it is I, Allah, the mighty, the wise. So Allah says, lo, it is I, Allah, the mighty, the wise. So who's in the fire here?
Allah.
That's Allah in the fire, right?
Yeah.
So imagine if I, put all this, put this together on a little slide or something like that, and pass around on Facebook that, Muslims believe their God came from a fire because he's speaking out of fire.
Or you could say he's in the fires of hell. He was in the hell. What is fire but hell?
Yeah, he's in the fire. He's in the fire. He's trying to escape. He's trying to escape the fire there. But I mean, think about that. I mean, that would be, no Muslim would take that seriously if I said, look, Allah is speaking out of the fire, so obviously he comes from the fire, and that, that's the end of the story. Not Allah entered into the fire. Allah has always existed. He entered into the fire for a specific purpose of communicating with Moses and so on. If you just leave all that out, they believe in a God who comes from fire. What kind of weird paganism is this? No Muslim would take that seriously, and yet that's exactly what they do when they talk about our scriptures.
Well, we could call him the fire god.
Yeah, Allah's the fire god.
Yeah, Allah's the fire god. Surah 27. Hey, I like that. Allah the fire god. There we go.
There's a lot of different angles. We do have a caller, and we're gonna let Yvonne ask a question, and we have two apologists here, David and Matt. And Yvonne, hello and greetings, and welcome to our program tonight. What is your question?
Hi. It's kind of ties in with the apologetics. It actually aims at Islam. The Islam teaches that Christians and Jews are deceived by Allah. So why would Allah send prophecies and miracles? I mean, after all, in Christianity, prophecies and miracles are sent to confirm our belief in God, not confuse us or lead us astray. So what were these, if these prophecies cannot be trusted and these miracles cannot be trusted, then I'm confused as to what Islam has to say about any of that.
Yeah, there are a couple different ways you could, things you can mean here. Theologically, that Allah leads people astray and that He guides others. But I think a more interesting one is that according to Islam, the reason Christians believe that Jesus died on the cross is that Allah tricked and deceived people into believing that Jesus died on the cross. So according to Islam, Jesus was never crucified. Allah took him up to heaven. But then Allah took someone else, made him look like Jesus, and this other person was crucified in Jesus' place. So you had a miraculous deception here, and the reason that people believe, that billions of people over the centuries have believed that Jesus died on the cross, is that Allah tricked people into believing that by making someone look like it. In other words, you can bring this up to a Muslim, say, hey, we have all this evidence, we have all these historical sources, we have eyewitnesses and so on of the crucifixion. I say, of course, because that's the way Allah made it look. Well, think about that, because now you've got Allah. He sends Jesus with a miraculous birth. And according to the Quran, Jesus starts speaking when he's a baby. He starts preaching Islam as a baby. Then he lives the most miraculous life in history. And so he's confirming Jesus with all these miracles, and yet then he ruins it all at the end by tricking people into thinking that Jesus died on the cross. And so now Christianity spreads because people think he died on the cross for sins. And so Allah gives the most miraculous confirmation of Jesus, but then completely corrupts that message by making it look like Jesus died on the cross when he didn't. Ends up starting the largest false religion in history, Christianity, according to Islam. And then Allah has to send Muhammad 6 centuries later to try and fix the mess, but then tells us all to believe that he had only, he had only tricked us for all those centuries. So there's a huge problem, and just as a general rule, once you introduce an omnipotent deceiver into your theology, you're in all kinds of trouble. Because I mean, how do you know you're watching me right now? You don't. Allah could be tricking you into thinking you're watching all of this right now. When you ask Muslims, why would Allah do that? Why would Allah trick all those people? There's no reason. At the end of the day, all you can say is, well, maybe he just didn't like the Jews. Well, if you're just going to say maybe he didn't like the Jews and so he tricked them and deceived them all, how do you know he didn't like Arabs and tricked them all into believing in Muhammad when Muhammad is just a horrible deceiver? You wreak havoc. And this is one of those kinds of beliefs where if you incorporate it, you have just destroyed, your ability to know anything. If you, for instance, if I came to believe that I'm in the Matrix right now, I just can't trust my senses anymore. If I believe that I'm, a brain in a vat and a scientist is giving me all these impressions by poking my brain, I can't know what to believe anymore, right? Well, once you have, this is the theological version of that. Once you have an omnipotent deceiver, it's hard. The only way to get out of that is just say, I don't believe that. I don't believe that anymore. There are massive theological problems with Jesus and the confirming miracles, and yet Allah actually leading people astray. Yes, a huge problem. All right, can we go through two more of these slides real quick? These are actually quick. All right, Matt, we wanted to look at two more very quickly. One is short, and this has to do with the way Muslims will point to something out of the Bible and try to get some mileage for their religion out of it. So the next one we have, it has Jesus bowing down, and he says, and it says, and he, Jesus, went a little further and fell on his face and prayed. Now I look at that and I say, what a silly, silly argument, but it is everywhere. It's all over Facebook. When I get in a conversation with a Muslim on Facebook, they point this out and say, you see, Jesus prayed like a Muslim. So this is confirmation of a Muslim. Look at him. He's bowing down, praying like Muslims pray. So lots of Christians don't pray like this. They'll pray holding their hands up in the air and things like that. So this is confirmation of Islam. So Matt, the question is, are you ready to be a Muslim after seeing it confirmed that Jesus prayed like a Muslim?
Well, I wouldn't base my whole eternal salvation on a physical position of someone who prays. And I wouldn't say that the proper designation of what defines Islam is bowing a face to the ground. And if that's the case, then the Jews are the ones who did that in the Old Testament in the presence of God. So the Muslims are now following the Jewish system of prayer. So you could turn it back on very easily. But no, that's not convincing at all. If they want to say it's convincing, well, okay, let it be convincing for them, but it's not convincing at all.
And what's really hilarious is we had this on the last show where a Muslim only quoted part of a verse, and if he just read the rest of the verse, it would have completely destroyed everything he was saying. And he didn't even quote the part of the verse that he quoted accurately. And this is another, this is a guy who went out and beheaded a woman after converting to Islam. But just look at the entire verse. So notice the part they quoted. And he went a little further and fell on his face and prayed. The whole verse says, going a little farther, he fell down on his face with the ground and prayed, my Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will. In Islam, God is not the father, not to anyone. Allah is not a father to anyone. The only relationship you have is a slave to master relationship. There is no father-son relationship in Islam. And so just reading the rest of the verse would wreak havoc on Islam. But also, Jesus prayed in a variety of ways. Yeah. So this is John chapter 11, verse 41. So they took away the stone. Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. Looked up. Well, that's not praying like a Muslim. And as Matt pointed out, there's a lot more packed into Islam than just the position of your body. I mean, he should have been, he would have to recite certain words. He'd have to be, well, I guess he wouldn't have to pray towards Mecca yet. He could still be facing the temple in Jerusalem. But there's a lot more packed into just that. I mean, if you're going to say that that's it, I mean, there are all kinds of people down through history who've prayed like that. And so the point here is, these are really, really, really weak arguments. And this is the sort of bread and butter of Islam nowadays.
In desperation.
Yeah, it's just really sad. All right, so
we do another caller. If we could sneak one in, unless you wanted to go to another slide.
Let's just look at this last slide so we can let Matt go, and then we can get to Anthony. But let's look at the last slide, and we'll have to go through these sort of rapid fire here, which is bad. We should spend an entire episode on going through these sort of little objections. So here, Rouleau is comparing what Jesus said to what a priest says. So the priest says Jesus is equal to the Father, whereas Jesus says the Father is greater than I. The priest says God exists as three persons. Jesus says the Lord our God is one Lord. The priest says Jesus is all-powerful. Jesus says, by myself I can do nothing. And the priest says Jesus is the only Son of God, whereas Jesus said, I ascend to my Father and your Father. So, Matt, I'll probably carry this over into discussion with Anthony, because I'm sure Anthony would like to respond to some of these as well. But if you want to respond to something in there, what would you take?
Well, let me do all of them really fast. It's easy.
All right.
And then he can expand on them. Mm-hmm. In John 14:28, the Father is greater than I. He's talking about position, not talking about nature. I'm greater in authority than my wife. It doesn't mean she's not a human. They fail to understand the context. In Philippians 2:5-8, Jesus had emptied himself, taken the form of a bondservant, being made in the likeness of men. In Galatians 4:4, he's made under the law. So in that position, the Father would be in a greater position than he. That's all it is. It's an issue of being under the law. The Lord our God is one Lord. Yes, it's a reference out of Deuteronomy 6:5. And we say one Lord. Yeah, we do believe that God is one. And even though Muslims like to say we're polytheists, they misrepresent the doctrine of the Trinity, which is strict monotheism. We just teach a Trinity, not a triad. So when the Bible says the Lord our God is one Lord, Christians totally agree with this. If a Muslim understood our theology, they wouldn't raise that as an objection. When Jesus says, by myself I can do nothing, it's because he came to do the will of the Father who sent him. John 6:37-40. He did not come to do his own will, because covenantally, the eternal covenant of Hebrews 13:20, he came to do the will of the Father to redeem the people. This is why he did not seek to do his own will, but the will of God. And this is what Muslims like to say, that they want to do the will of Allah. Well, Jesus was doing that too, but he was made under the law, Galatians 4:4, and for a little while lower than the angels, Hebrews 2:9. Theologically, this has no bearing at all on his deity. It's an issue dealing with his humiliation and voluntary limitation of being under that law in order to accomplish the will of the Father who sent him. I said to my Father and your Father, any good Jew, Jesus says, is definitely a man as well as divine, John 1:1 and verse 14, Colossians 2:9, Hebrews 1:6-8. He has someone he would call his Lord and his God in the under the requirements of the Old Testament. Under the law. He was under Old Testament law because the Old Testament abrogation had not yet occurred till his death. So he said he ascended to his Father and your Father. He's just talking about God as Father. And then, like you said earlier, Muslims can't call God their Father, but Jesus does. So why would they have a problem with what Jesus is saying in each and every one of these? I could expand on each one of these for quite a bit more, but those are the brief things. Generally speaking, the Muslims, almost every single time I've ever talked to any Muslims, and I've talked to an awful lot, they just do not understand the issue of the two natures of Christ and Jesus being made under the law. And I repeatedly correct the Muslims and say, look, you need to study what you criticize because you're misrepresenting our religion. You do not know what you're criticizing. You're making yourself look foolish. You're bringing shame upon your religion by purposely misrepresenting or retaining your ignorance and trying to sound like you know what you're talking about when you really don't. Please, I say, study the stuff. And I tell them, and one last thing, if you want to know what Christianity really teaches, there's this nice website you can go to, carm.org. Go look it up and read about Jesus.
Mm-hmm. And for viewers out there, Matt has certainly one of the best apologetics websites on the planet, and so many people would say it is the best. But anyone who's been on the site would grant that it's certainly one of the top candidates. And so any sort of question you have, you can go to carm.org and look up answers. He has lots of videos and also lots of articles, and he tends to keep them nice and short. And so that's certainly helpful. So thank you, Matt, for joining us. And we're going to switch over to Anthony.
All right,
Anthony,
God bless, buddy. See you guys.
Thanks,
all right,
Matt.
catch you next time.
We do have a caller, and I know we're approaching a break, so we'll take this call if we can, and I know Anthony is shortly going to be with us. And it's Ted. Hello, Ted, and welcome, and thanks for calling. What's your question?
Hi, guys. You're doing a good job enlightening the West about Islam. My question was really for Matt, though.
Oh, sorry about that. Matt's going to be back on Wednesday, though, if you have a question specifically for Matt.
Maybe you can answer that.
Okay.
You can tell a tree by its fruit. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Christopher Columbus was a Catholic, and he discovered our country for the civilized world. Mm-hmm. How can Matt say that the Catholic Church is an apostate? I am a Catholic, and I am not an apostate. Mm-hmm. Do you have an answer for that, or should I just wait for?
Yeah, and I wouldn't even recommend bringing it up to Matt on this. Here we're sort of talking about issues between Christianity and Islam.
Yeah, well, he still has to explain that. He can't just say that.
Well, yeah, but look what you're saying. If that's what you're saying, then you're saying that anything Matt Slick says he has to answer for when he's a guest on a show.
I'm saying if you are truly fair on this program.
Really? So anything Matt Slick has ever said, this is the time to call in and ask him about it, as opposed to contacting him or something like that. I'm just not going. It's not going. In other words, it sounds like you're trying to turn this into a discussion between Catholicism and.
It was a question. It was to ask Matt.
I know, but what you're doing now. Look, okay, cut this off, and I'll answer it because he's talking over me. It looks like what you're trying to do is to turn this into a discussion between Catholicism and Protestantism. I have no objections to that kind of conversation. That's an important topic. There are differences between Catholics and Protestants, and people who want to get to the truth need to have that discussion. Matt discusses that, but think about it. If you say, "Hey, Matt, I want the answer here," Matt's going to answer, and then you're going to want more answers, and then that becomes the conversation. You're saying, "Well, he has to answer for that." No. He doesn't have to answer for that on this program. If you want him to answer for that, you can ask him. If he wants to have that discussion, he's welcome to do that. But I'm afraid you don't get to just call in here and start demanding that we change the subject to issues of Catholicism versus Protestantism. Again, I'm not denying that it's an important topic or an interesting topic or a topic that Christians want to have. But it's everyone. There are people who want to turn that into every discussion here, and we're talking about apologetics saving lives in the context of terrorists. After converting to Islam, it's a pretty focused topic there to just change it and go to now we're going to talk about Catholicism instead. So sorry about that.
We are coming up to a break, but I would like to see if we could sneak another caller. We have Jeff on the line. Jeff, what's your question?
Hi, Brother David. I'm glad to be able to talk to you once.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm doing great. I've had one formal debate and a number of informal debates with Muslims, and I've had an experience. I wonder if you've had the same.
Okay.
Very tough to get them to give direct answers to direct questions, to directly challenge exactly what I say, without totally changing the subject and heading off on a rabbit trail. Is that your experience as well?
With lots of people. Yeah. So was that a yes or no question, or did you?
Yeah, pretty much. I was wondering. Okay, how do we get them back on?
Well, we have to realize that if you're in a debate, especially like a formal debate, because you have different kinds of. You could be having a discussion with a Muslim. You're all out in the middle of nowhere or something like that. If you're in a formal debate where there's an audience. Generally your focus should be the audience, right? You're hoping the Muslim picks some things up, but there are people in the audience who really don't know, and they're getting a lot of this for the first time, and so I would bring that out, and it's good to if you're starting off, you lay out your arguments and claims, and then if someone goes down a rabbit trail or takes it off in a different direction, you pull it right back. You jump right back up and said, look, this is our topic. Here were my 3 arguments. My opponent didn't answer or address any of them. He went off in this other direction. Now look at where we are, blah, blah, blah. And then if he does it again, you jump up in your next presentation and you point out, hey, he is not answering. And then you can start claiming victory. Look, hey, I gave arguments. He has not answered one of my arguments. He keeps trying to divert attention, deflect attention to another area. Why? I can only conclude it's because he does not have answers for the case I have laid down. What can we conclude from this? Well, that my opponent just has no answer for my arguments. And so you can let people, you want the people to pick up on it because they can miss it in all the discussion and the words back and forth and so on. They can miss it, and so you bring their attention to it. And what you want is the people in the audience start thinking, yeah, why does that guy start taking it off in a different direction when this guy's staying focused and laying out clear arguments?
Right.
So that's the general idea.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks again for all the work you do.
Oh, all right.
Well, we're going to go to a quick break again, and we have one last segment before we're done for the evening, and it's been moving by pretty quickly here. Thanks again for all your calls. Again, 248-416-1300. I hear the phones ringing. We got more to come, and Anthony Rogers as well. Stay with us. We'll be right back. And we're back. It's last segment of the evening, and we're going to be here till midnight. Thanks for calling, and a lot of lively discussion. And Anthony Rogers is waiting in the wings. And David, what's on your mind? We talk to Anthony a little bit about what our next topic is here.
Yeah, Anthony, are you there?
I'm here.
Hey, sorry that Matt just kept talking and talking and talking and talking and took all the time up.
He had a lot of encouragement.
Just kidding, Matt, if you're out there watching. Yeah, but our time is short. Did you catch our discussion of that slide of the Father is greater than I and Jesus is equal to the Father and so on?
Yeah, Matt did a splendid job. The only thing I would say, I think, that's really interesting is that 3 of the 4 passages on that slide were from John's Gospel.
Yeah.
Ordinarily, we hear from Muslims that we shouldn't go to John's Gospel. That Gospel's not reliable. It departs from what we find consistently throughout the Synoptics. We would disagree with that, of course, but the fact is that John's Gospel is the one Gospel among the 4 that gives special attention to the issue of Christ's deity. Not exclusively, of course. Matthew, Mark, and Luke also teach our Lord's deity, but it's John's Gospel that begins in the prologue announcing that Jesus is God, that is, that the Word was God. The climax in John's Gospel is verse 28 of chapter 20, where Thomas says, "My Lord and my God," which you'll observe is only about 10 or 11 verses after the last reference that you find on that slide, where it says, "I ascend to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." And then just the other passage was Mark, where Jesus quotes the Shema from Deuteronomy 6:4. If you continue reading in the passage, you'll see that Jesus then turns the tables on them. This is part of a dialogue that Jesus is having with the religious leaders, where they're putting a series of questions to Jesus, trying to catch him in a trap. get him to say something wrong or what have you. And after they exhausted all their questions to Jesus, he answers appropriately. Then Jesus turns the tables on them and asks them a question. He says, how is it that the scribes say that the Messiah is the son of David, when David himself, speaking by inspiration of the Spirit, calls him Lord? He's there referring to Psalm 110, where it says, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. So in effect, what Jesus does in that passage is he says, yes, true enough, the Shema, the great creed of Israel, says there's only one true God, one true Lord, and yet the same Old Testament scriptures also affirm that there are at least two persons who may properly bear that title, that is, the title of the one Lord. And so Jesus then puts them on the horns of a dilemma. That's all I would add to that. I think Matt did a splendid job.
And what I find interesting is that when you don't zero in on part of a verse, in part of a chapter, in the context of a book that is obviously declaring the deity of Christ, when you actually read even the general context, you find that these verses, you can't understand them apart from the context of the Trinity and the Incarnation. So for instance, when Jesus says, by myself I can do nothing, if you read chapter 5, there is no way you can make sense of that chapter without the Trinity and the Incarnation. When in verse 17, they accuse Jesus of claiming to be equal with God, like he's some additional God. Well, he's not claiming to be some additional God, so what we would expect Jesus to do in the light of the Trinitarian theology is to point out that he is God, and yet that he is distinct from the Father, and that's exactly what he does. He claims that he's the one who raises the dead, that he's the final judge, that we have to honor him the same way that we honor the Father. And so it's in that context that he says, by myself I can do nothing. In other words, as a separate deity, I can't do anything. Why? Because he's one with the Father. And so, and the same thing with all of these passages, the Father is greater than I. Well, once you go on and see Jesus claiming that he's going to return to the Father with the glory that he had before the foundation of the world, then you get, so that's how he started off. Well, how did he get here to where the Father is greater than I, that the Father has a greater position? Oh, through the incarnation, and so on. It only makes sense in light of the doctrines of the Trinity and the Incarnation. The Muslims will pick out the parts they like, ignore everything else, and then this is supposed to be what confirms Islam. And it's just shockingly sloppy. And the sad part, again, is that people are dying over this, right? I mean, people are, oh, look, what great arguments against Christianity, because I don't know anything about Christianity, and therefore I can't refute this stuff. Let me convert to Islam. Now what does Islam teach? Oh, I have to wage jihad. Let me go find a head to chop off. Sad, 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 sad stuff. But Anthony wanted to take a look at, and we don't have time to really go. I wouldn't mind spending some episodes eventually going through in detail on some of these supposed scientific claims. But these are hilarious. These are the ones that were on Rouleau's website. But can we get the slide number 2 up? I don't think we'll be able to see the whole thing on the screen. We have it?
We're working on getting it, it looks like. Maybe.
We got it? Is it not going over to it?
Nope, wrong one.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Oh, okay. They did get it up on the screen because this one's sort of longer. But now this is awesome. This is cut, so far as I can tell, this is cut directly from Osama Abdullah's website. It's giving the miracle of the 360 joints that Muhammad taught. So here's the claim. We don't have to read all of this, but the claim is Muhammad claimed that there were 360 joints in the human body. For all of history, up until 1995, it was thought that there were 340 joints in the human body. But then 20 additional joints were discovered in the ear, 10 on each side. And so this brought the total number up to 360, thus proving that Muhammad was right all along, and therefore miraculous divine confirmation of Muhammad's prophethood. How could he have known what would only be discovered in 1995? Anthony, are you ready to convert to Islam based on this awesome argument?
Not even close.
No? Okay. Well, if you're rejecting an argument, there must be a problem with the argument. So what do you see here?
Well, I would begin with just some observations about methodology. First off, in regards to scientific wonders confirming the Quran, it has to be granted that if a scientific insight discovered in advance or proclaimed in advance is sufficient to confirm the Quran or the Hadith or Muhammad as a prophet, that all that's true, then by the same token, a scientific blunder would disconfirm the Quran or Muhammad as a prophet. And so if we find something like this actually being the case, that Muhammad discerned that the human body had 360 joints, it would also be relevant for us to consider if Muhammad also made false statements of a scientific nature. So, for example, we'd want to consider things that we find in the Quran, like the sun setting in a muddy pool, or shooting stars being missiles sent out by Allah to keep the jinn from sneaking into his presence and overhearing what's going on in heaven, or Allah creating Adam 90 feet tall. Those sorts of things would also come into play. As well, one thing that I always marvel at when I think about this is, if the Quran is such a scientific book, how come Muslims are always discovering these insights after scientists? Why aren't they discovering these things first? Why aren't they first announcing these things to the world? Instead, it seems that science discovers something, and then Muslims go back to their sources and start rummaging around the Quran or the Hadith in search of something that might sound like it fits there. I just don't find that to be consistent with the notion that the Quran is a book of guidance when it's not guiding them, or that it's a clear book when they don't seem to be getting the message very clearly. And a third thing is, again, consistent with the previous point, is if it can be said that a particular scientific insight can prove the Quran, then what should we say of the fact that science itself, the whole kit and caboodle, was a product of Western Christendom? That's a fact, I think, that should be given a lot of airplay. Because the fact is, if you read historians of science, such as Professor Edward Grant or Stanley Jackie, they'll all tell you that science was a deliverance of the Christian worldview. It wasn't something born in the context of Islam. So these are just some general observations that I would make. And one other general observation I would make is, if science didn't discover that Muhammad was correct until 1995, which means that science didn't prove Islam prior to that point, at least on this issue, and we didn't discover this until 1995, what are we to, are we to say that the Quran's inspiration is suspended at this point until the next scientific discovery disconfirms it? I mean, maybe we're going to discover 5 more joints. I mean, we didn't discover these, apparently, according to Osama, or whoever this guy's taking it from. We didn't discover these things until 1995, so are we going to discover something in 2015? And if we do, are Muslims going to turn around and reject the Quran? Those are some of the first things I would observe just as a general lead-in, and I think these apply across the board to all scientific miracle claims. But just a couple other points. One is, if you read a book like Nathan Siven's book, State, Cosmos, and the Body in the last 3 centuries BC, he points out that there were other people groups that thought that the human body had 360 joints before Muhammad came along. And so if this proves that the Quran is inspired, then it would also prove these people are inspired. And again, all of this is assuming that the human body has 360 joints. And I'm not granting that. I'm just saying, if that was proof for Muhammad being a prophet, then it would also be proof that all these other people were prophets, or that their books were inspired, and so on and so forth.
And so notice, you've been very generous, just saying, hey, if we take the claim at face value, we believe what we're told, we believe what the Muslims are saying, there are still all kinds of problems with the argument. When we then combine those sort of general points that would apply to all kinds of issues, when we combine that with the fact that it's total nonsense, namely that there was no discovery in 1995 that introduced 20 new joints into human anatomy, that no one before 1995 said that the human body has 340 joints, and that no one now says that there are 360 joints in the human body, you realize they've been making up every single step of this argument. Again, just to clarify, I have a biology degree. It's one of the degrees I got. No biology book I ever had said that there are 360 joints in the human body. Why? Because when you actually ask a scientist or a biologist or something how many joints there are in the body, you start getting, well, it kind of depends on what you mean by joint, because there's a lot of dispute about what you mean as joint. It's clear that certain joints are clearly joints. So you can count up the joints in the fingers. So you got one here, one here, one here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and then the thumb only has 2, so 13, 14. All right, you got 14 here, you got 14 on this side, and then you can start counting them up. Well, when you do that, you don't get anything anywhere near 360. You're not even close. So then you have to start counting all kinds of other things as joints, and there's just no clear definition of a joint that allows you to say, aha, the number is 360. You would have to do some very, very creative counting methods to do that. But guess what? No one does that. No one does that. They claim, the number was 340, and then 20 more were found, and then it's 360. No one says the 340. No one says that 20 new ones were discovered, and no one now says 360. I couldn't find that anywhere. And even on Osama's site, the main evidence that he gave that there are 360 turned out to be, well, let me introduce it. He said, here, go to this link. He took this down now. But he said, here, go to this link on this website, and you will see 360. And you go to the website, and you actually see joints, 360. Wow. And then you look up, and it's actually the phone extension, like of the bones of the joints department, right? In other words, it's a phone directory. It's a phone directory that here are the different departments you can contact. The joints department is type in extension 360. So this is the evidence that's given for this claim, and it really draws attention to an extremely important point. There are Muslim apologists who will say absolutely anything. Why? Because there are lots of gullible people out there who will fall for it. And that is scary. It is scary that I could make up an argument tonight, something completely ridiculous, and say, oh, it was discovered. So for instance, Muhammad said it's okay to drink water with a dead animal floating in it, right? He said it's okay to drink water, to use water for ablutions from the well of Buddha, which had feces and all kind of dead animals thrown in it and so on. But he also said it's okay to drink water from a pool with dead animal floating in it, provided that the water didn't change colors to like green or something. That's totally false and ridiculous. But if I made a little sign like this and I said, it's been thought until 2014 that drinking water with a dead animal in it is unsafe and deadly, but scientists have just recently held a conference confirming through many studies that it's perfectly safe, and yet Muhammad was the one who knew this all along, this would circulate to millions of people, and it would be put forward as clear proof and evidence of Islam, and it could just be total nonsense. And that is something that is absolutely terrifying, when there is just no concern for truth or accuracy, and when a religion tends to do this to people. Boy, that's frightening to me, Anthony. What do you think?
It certainly is. The same people who would fall for an argument of this nature are the same sorts of people who would hear the command, go fight and slay the infidels wherever you find them. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely frightening.
Mm-hmm. We actually do have some callers, and we've got one up and ready here. Chuck, hello there. Welcome to the show, and what's your question?
Thank you, David, for all the work that you do. My question is about the prayer. I've heard, many Muslims say that, Jesus prays the same way as the Muslims. Mm-hmm. And the question is, Jesus didn't face Mecca. He didn't perform ablution. He didn't pray in Arabic. He didn't, hold his hands down and then say Allahu Akbar and then bend down. There's a whole song and dance that goes with Islamic prayer, and Jesus didn't do any of those, yet they claim that, they prayed the same way. I just don't understand where they are even coming to that conclusion. it's only 1% of the way that Jesus prayed resembled the Islamic prayer.
No, you're absolutely correct in that, and it's really a perfect example of how there are Muslim apologists who will just appeal to anything, no matter how ridiculous. I mean, they're actually saying, look, Jesus bowed with his face to the ground. Muslims bow their faces to the ground. Therefore, Jesus was a Muslim. I mean, how ridiculous is that? By the way, that's how I pray. I get down on my face, right? I get down on my face.
Yeah.
I don't always pray like that, neither did Jesus. Jesus would look up to heaven and so on. So in Christianity, there are a variety of ways to pray. But you know, when I'm actually saying prayers, I bow down. Does that make me a Muslim? It doesn't make me anything like a Muslim. What are you talking about? I refute Islam on a daily basis. How am I a Muslim just based on my body position? And so it's just really, really sad. Those types of prayers were around a long time before Muslims came along. And for Muslims just come along and say, hey, anyone who prays like this is a good Muslim. Well, great. Then I'm a great Muslim.
We are actually running out of time. We're about 10 minutes
Thank
left.
you, brother.
All right.
Thank you very much, Chuck. It's, you know, earlier on, you know, you mentioned gullible, David. And I've often thought, does Islam, the leaders of Islam today, and I don't know if it's historical, but would you say that is it a fair statement to say that your perception is that they prey on those who are maybe misfits or are bitter with society? What is the attraction, and who do they go after, and why?
The sort of overriding principle is use whatever you can in whatever way you can that will work to the advantages of Islam. So if it's going to involve deceiving people, then deceive people. If it's going to involve, you know, using killing and raping women as helping you to get jihad, then that's what you do. If it's, you know, telling people Islam is a religion of peace because that's, you know, what's in the best interest of the Islamic community, it's do whatever is going to benefit the Muslim community. And that's what you do, and that's sort of the overriding principle. And so it can be all kinds of things. And yes, there will be manipulation and deception and everything, but if that's what works, then that's what works. Muhammad said war is deceit.
Okay, so are Muslims charged to kill just Christians or anyone that's not a Muslim?
Well, just to be clear, it's not in every circumstance. It wouldn't be over here, right? If a Muslim lives down the street for you, he's not commanded to just come and kill you, unless it's an act of terrorism for some purpose. It's not just a blanket call. It's in an area where Islam has come to dominate. Then you give the pagans a choice: convert or die. The pagans are polytheists, atheists, things like that. Christians or Jews have a third option: the jizya. You can pay tribute money to Muslims in acknowledgement of your inferiority. So you can do that. So it's not just a command to kill Christians. It's kill Christians if they're, you know, if they're doing something bad, or they've sided with them. If they've done something that's punishable by death, then you could just kill the Christians. But if it's just a Christian who's minding his own business and never done anything wrong, something like that, then you would give him the option of converting or paying the jizya.
But earlier we talked about if we're a tax-paying citizen for a
country. And that's why I said if you haven't done something that's can earn you a death penalty, right? So you could say over here, you could say of a Christian over here. I'm talking about like Christians in Iraq or something like that. Okay. You know, that's why ISIS is coming along and giving them the option of the jizya. They give the Christians the option of paying the tribute money, whereas the Yazidis and so on, they don't get that same.
How do they communicate that to a Christian, the option of the jizya? Do they say individually, or they tell as a group, or they warn them in a letter? How do they communicate that?
You gather all the Christians up and announce to them, hey, you pay the jizya, or
like right now.
Yeah, or no, you can hey, you go home, get your funds together. This is the amount you owe based on, you know, your status or whatever. Okay. This is the amount you owe. If you want to pay it, pay it. If not, you better start running because we're going to kill you.
And if they honor it, if they pay them, do they what do they do then? Do they join the ranks of the?
There's still plenty of rules to follow. You're not allowed to, you know, build a church or repair a church or you know, criticize Islam in any way, or you know, display your Christianity. You can't go around wearing a cross. Can't go around preaching things like that. But other than that, if you're paying the tribute, and you are not doing anything that you're not allowed to do. They're supposed to not harm you.
We have 5 minutes left, and I don't want to get in the way of any discussion that you or Anthony have.
Yeah, with this last couple minutes, I would want to take more time to go through this. But can we look at the slide number 3? It's the last remaining one. No, that's the wrong guy. That was the guy from last show. There you go. Yeah, number 3. All right, Anthony.
Yes.
We only have a couple minutes, but I always thought this was hilarious because a Muslim hit me with this. I'd never heard of it, and I told him, I said, I don't know, I'll look into this. I went and looked into it, and I sent him a response that night. I just went to the library, I looked all of this up, and I thought it was the silliest. I was giggling when I sent this, and he didn't even try to defend it after I sent the response. But have you examined this miraculous Quranic confirmation? And so the argument would go that in the Quran, Allah says that He's going to preserve the body of Pharaoh, and lo and behold, after so many thousands of years, the body of Pharaoh was discovered, and this proves that Allah's command was right. I mean, Allah's claim was right all along, and this is miraculous proof of Islam. I see this all the time. What do you think about it?
Right. Well, since we only have a couple minutes, just to get right to the chase here, one very relevant thing that I would point out is, and this is relevant to the scientific miracles issue, when I mentioned that Muslims will see a scientific insight, then they'll go back to the Quran and they'll see if the Quran can be made to fit with it, to jive with it. In this case, we have Muslims doing something similarly. The quotation that this guy has here isn't even true to the Arabic, and you can check this out on islamawakened.com. You can go to the online Arabic corpus and look at the fact that the word that's used there actually means that He will save Pharaoh in his body, not that He will save or preserve Pharaoh's body for a future time. It's saying that Pharaoh is going to be spared from this judgment, because Pharaoh, if you look at the previous verse, in fact, he has it there, 1090, Pharaoh turns. He confesses that Allah is God and so forth. And so Allah is saying that He's going to save him from this destruction. So it's not talking about his body later being discovered so that people can then, it'll be on display and so on and so forth. That's just one of many different things. But that, by the way, also proves that the Quran is contradictory, because other passages of the Quran say that Pharaoh, along with the Egyptians, would be destroyed. Surah 28:40, for example, it says, "So we caught hold of him and his hosts, then we cast them into the sea, and see how was the end of the unjust." So Pharaoh and the Egyptians were both destroyed, according to one verse of the Quran. There are actually two others. But according to the verse this guy's quoting, in the literal Arabic, he was supposed to be spared. So there's no miracle here at all.
And what's interesting is as you pointed out, it looks like a contradiction. It doesn't say we will save your body. That would, and then the question would be what that means. It's we will save you in your body. So that sounds like survival. As you pointed out, though, other parts of the Quran talk about Pharaoh's going to die. But the reconciliation in the Muslim commentaries, Ibn Abbas said that what this referred to is people believed in the deity of Pharaoh. And so since Pharaoh repents, Allah is going to make his body appear on shore so that people can say, oh, this is Pharaoh, he's dead, he's not a deity. So he's blessing Pharaoh in that way. Hey, you've led lots of people astray. Now I'm going to give you an opportunity to set things right when your dead body washes up on shore and people say, no, you're actually just a mere mortal. So and by the way, that's Ibn Abbas. So if Muslims are saying, oh, what it really means is, well, why didn't anyone in the early Muslim community have that understanding? As you pointed out, it's always after something comes along that they start making these claims about. But there are all kinds of other problems with this as well. One, this seems to be the wrong Pharaoh. This is Merneptah. Merneptah is the one that they normally use, but Israel was already in Palestine during the reign of Merneptah. So how do you have the Exodus? How do you have the Exodus and Pharaoh gets killed during the Exodus, but Merneptah, the guy who's supposedly killed during this, Israel was already there. The Jews were already there in Palestine. So they got the wrong Pharaoh, apparently, unless they come up with some brilliant argument for why this is the right Pharaoh. But one other thing, I looked up this Pharaoh, and this is the Encyclopedia of Ancient Egypt. Says Merneptah was, based on examining the body, Merneptah was bald, corpulent, stood 5 feet 7 inches tall. The mummy shows signs of calcification of the arteries as well as arthritis. The king's poor teeth bore evidence of dental surgery having been performed while he was still alive. So this guy has calcification of the arteries and arthritis. This isn't a guy who died by drowning. He wasn't out there chasing the Israelites down with massive health problems. This guy could barely walk, let alone be carried around. Let alone be riding a chariot after the Jews. So, one, the verse doesn't say he's going to preserve your body for future generations. It sounds like it's saying he's going to keep him alive. If you decide that it means he's going to preserve the body, well, that would just go with the original Islamic interpretation, which is it's going to appear to the people so that they understand that he's not God. If you want to say that this is the body that confirms it, you got the wrong Pharaoh. Israel was already there when this Pharaoh was around, and this Pharaoh definitely didn't die by drowning. There's no way he would have been riding around in a chariot at all. And so this argument fails in every possible way. If you just read the Quran, or if you read the early Islamic commentaries, or read the history of this Pharaoh, or you read his medical report, it's absurd and ridiculous in every possible way, but this is what circulates as the clear proof of Islam. Let's all believe in Islam and go chop someone's head off because of this passage.
And on that note, now is the time to wake up, but actually now is the time to move on. We're actually past our time of our 2-hour program. It went by really quick. David, tell us what's going on this week, and thank you, Anthony and Matthew earlier for being on the program. What's happening this week?
Well, tomorrow I have a debate with Farhan Qureshi. We know that there are some issues with ISIS going on in the world, and Farhan and I have some different views about how we need to confront that problem. So we're actually going to debate it out and give people our different views. After that, we'll have a show following that. We're going to have more guests. We've got Bill Warner coming up. We've got others, and so should be an interesting time over these next couple days.
Stay tuned. We got programs all this week, and we're featuring David and some other apologists. We're running out of time. God bless you. Thanks for being a part of our program tonight. We'll see you next time on Trinity Channel. Thank you.